So today I want to talk about grief, and it's something that, the Lord has been teaching me about recently as well. So I guess we can start with defining what it is. So what is grief? Grief is a natural emotion we have in response to the loss of something we hold dear, or the pain of not having something we should have had, but we never got, or the feeling when we are harmed or wronged. So it can stem from a hurt, a loss, or a lack, right? And why is it important to grieve? What does grief have to do with our spiritual and emotional health? Well, simply it's healthy to grieve when you need to. And we all suffer from the consequences of sin in this life, right? I'm not saying that, whatever hardships we go through is necessarily a result of our personal sin, but all suffering is a result of sin, right? So you need to grieve to heal and grow, and it's unhealthy to suppress it. So suppressing it will only lead to depression, it will lead to bad mental health and bad relationships. And that's what depression means, right? The suppression of emotions. You keep depressing things, and that's how people get depressed. And you'll never truly move on from the pain and hurt unless you grieve it, and it doesn't go away. Even if you think you've forgotten, your body doesn't actually forget. It's all still there affecting you subconsciously. And everything from insomnia to skin issues to eating disorders and mental health issues can develop from the resulting stress, right? But why can't we move on unless we grieve? What's the reason? It's because it's unfair. And if we don't grieve what we should grieve, it's actually a form of injustice. I think we have an innate desire for natural justice as a result of being made in the image of God. An example will probably make this clearer. So imagine this, right? A criminal breaks into a home, he robs the place, knocks over the old grandma living there, injuring her. He steals all her possessions and then laughs at her on the way out. Terrible situation, right? And then he's caught, arrested and brought to trial, and the judge is just like, you're free to go. How does that make you feel? And not only that, he turns around and tells the grandma, you're not allowed to complain. You're not allowed to be sad. Does that sit right with you? Just as there are consequences for a crime, there are consequences for harm to a victim. And grief is just a natural part of the consequence of what happened. So it's just as unfair to tell that grandma she's not allowed to grieve as it is to say to the offender, you're free to go. Both sides are unjust, right? But the question is, do you tell that to yourself sometimes? Do you tell yourself, no, you're not allowed to grieve. You're not allowed to be sad for whatever reason. Do you feel like you can grieve? Do you believe that you should grieve? Do you grieve? These are all questions that we should ask ourselves, Which brings us to examine what are some things stopping us from grieving. They're all some form of misbelief or misunderstanding, but here are some examples. And this one is taken from Stan's sermon at my Chinese church last Sunday. Heavily inspired. Yeah. But the first one is, see if this sounds familiar, right? If you have God, you shouldn't feel sad. Maybe you just need to pray more or read the Bible more. But I grew up hearing some version of that a lot in my own home and in the churches that I went to. So much so that I started to believe it and I started saying it to myself. So whenever I felt sad about something, I'd be like, but I have God. Or no matter what happened, if I felt grieved, I'd be like, damn, I just need to pray more. Teachings like that, ironically, actually grieve God. And yes, God grieves too. So Genesis 6 tells us, the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was grieved. Right? So God grieves. And everything God does is godly. That's the definition of the word. So if God grieves, grief in the right context is a godly emotion too. And as long as you grieve when you're supposed to, it's not wrong. And in fact, it's wrong not to grieve. So if it were true that we shouldn't grieve and feel sad if we have God, then how does that work when God grieves and he is God, right? It's just doesn't make any sense, right? So it's wrong when others question us for grieving. It's equally wrong when we question ourselves. But the good news is you can tell others and you can tell yourself, no, right? It's my second favorite word of all time. We need to start using it more. But why? Because saying no to lies is what gives you freedom, right? So people telling you shouldn't grieve, or you yourself telling you shouldn't grieve is a lie, just say no to it. and you have freedom and you can grieve, right? But lies have no power over you unless you give it power by believing them. So really the choice is in your hands, right? And when someone tells you this lie, if you're up for it, you can explain why they are wrong in a calm but firm way for their benefit. If you can't be bothered that day, no is a complete sentence, right? Just no and move on. You don't need to justify yourself to anyone, but if you're feeling extra sassy, there's nothing wrong with making your boundaries very clear. Something like, I don't want to talk about it right now. I'm grieving and what you're saying isn't helpful. I need some space. Thanks and goodbye. Is perfectly fine, right? Remember that God respects your boundaries. Therefore, you should respect them as well and hold others accountable to the same standard. That is not rude, right? That is self-respect. Respect yourself the way God respects you. No more and no less, right? That is healthy self-esteem. And if you want to hear more on self-esteem, you can find my talk on self-esteem on the Our Spirit Life channel, right? Please like and subscribe. Yep, plug Stan's channel. Yep. But anyway, the second lie that we tell ourselves or others tell us is that God will be disappointed in me if I grieve. He'll say something like, am I not enough for you? You have me, yet you're still sad. We already established that God grieves, right? So if we were to say to God, why are you grieving? Are you not enough for yourself? That's really weird, right? It doesn't really make sense. It's the same thing though when we ask ourselves that. So, and no, God does not ask you, am I not enough? Why are you sad? Instead, the Bible tells us in Psalm 34 that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. And he also tells us in Matthew 5 that blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Right? God will not be disappointed in you. He is eagerly waiting for you to go to him with your grief, to comfort and heal you. In fact, the Bible never uses the word disappointed to describe God's emotions towards us, which is something that Jessie pointed out when I was reading her this, which is a really good point. It uses words like we grieve God, we hurt God, we sometimes maybe even anger God, but he never says that we disappoint God, right? So when you go to him with your grief, he will just hug you and comfort you while you cry, but you have to let him do that. He will not force himself on you against your will. And if you would like to know why he doesn't do that, go and find my talk on sovereignty on Our Spirit Life channel. Again, like and subscribe. But I'd like to just briefly summarize those 2 points before we move on, because they can feel quite similar, right? The first two that we just went through. But the first point is that grief is not a result of your lack of faith or your lack of action. It's the consequence of some sort of harm, whether something you lacked or something that happened to you. But it's not your fault. So don't blame yourself for grieving. And the second point is that God will not be disappointed in you if you know him yet still feel sad, still grieve. So don't be afraid to go as you are and grieve with him. You know, you will only receive comfort and not condemnation. And the third point is that sometimes we tell ourselves, other people have it worse. What I'm going through is nothing compared to them. Therefore, I can't grieve or I shouldn't grieve. But then it begs the question, what has someone else's pain got to do with you? Why do they cancel out? And I don't know why this is such a common misbelief. Maybe it has something to do with our culture, where any sort of complaint or cry for help when we were younger was not met with comfort, but with a form of, I like to call it well-intentioned invalidation. In an attempt to make us feel better, perhaps our parents would remind us of how they had it worse, especially in the immigrant culture. Any sort of complaint is like, oh, but when I was little, you know, I had to like walk 10 kilometers to school, or, you know, carrying 30 kgs or whatever. So like your complaint is nothing. Some form of that. And that just makes us feel bad for feeling bad, right? That's the only result. But the truth is that pain is not a competition. It's not a who had it worse comparison. If it were, then only one person on earth has the right to grieve, right? If it was a competition, and that would be the person who had it worse. But that's just not true. And then you hear conversations like this, you know, like, ow, I broke my leg. It hurts so much. And then someone will be like, that's nothing. I broke both my legs. And then a third person will be like, that's nothing. Both of you better stop feeling pain because I broke both my legs and my arm. I used a physical pain as an example to highlight the point, but the same rule applies to mental and emotional pain. Yet we seem to gaslight ourselves into that kind of thinking sometimes, right? Yeah, it's not a competition. In fact, when we tell ourselves this lie, we are actually establishing our ability to feel good on top of other people's pain. That's not a good foundation, because what you're really saying is, I should feel good when others have it worse than me, right? Which is a very dangerous way of thinking, right? And it's not right. The Bible tells us, in John 11, verse 35, it's actually a really special verse because it's the shortest verse in the Bible, at least in the King James Version. It's literally 2 words. Jesus wept. Full stop. Jesus wept. And he was just, the context is that Jesus was going to Lazarus, his friend, who had died. And we all know that he revived Lazarus from the dead, right? Yet he still wept. So he knew that his friend died. He knew that he was going to revive him. So he wasn't going to stay dead for very long. Yet he still wept, right? So this shows us that grief is not about being weak or strong. It's just a reflection of how much you valued or how much you needed the things you lost or didn't have. And ultimately, we are all sick with an illness called sin. It causes death, suffering, pain, you name it. And all those things we need to grieve. But God has the cure, and his name is Jesus. He's desperate for you to come to him. A book that we've been reading is called Gentle and Lowly. And in that book, it describes the heart of Jesus. And it compares Jesus' heart for us like a doctor with a cure to some sort of disease, let's say malaria or something easily treatable by drugs. And this doctor's going through the Amazon rainforest or whatever, begging the local tribes who are suffering terribly with this disease, right? And this doctor's just begging them, I have the cure, please take it. When those people who are sick come to Jesus and take the cure, Jesus isn't angry, right? He doesn't go, oh, what took you so long? He doesn't go like, oh, your own actions caused this. There's no complaining. There's no condemnation. When people come to Jesus for the cure that he's been begging them to take, no one is more overjoyed than the doctor himself, right? When these people, after he's walked all this way, suffered terribly just to give them a free cure, and they finally take it, there's no one happier than Jesus. Amen. So we need to come to God bravely, fearlessly, and we will not be met with perhaps the way that our friends or that our family treated us when we needed help. God is perfect. He's not the same as sometimes our imperfect family, right? Yeah, that's his heart for you. There's no one more desperate for you to come to him. There's no one who rejoices more when you come to him, even if it is to just grieve. He will grieve with you. There's no more condemnation with God. No, I told you so. There's no, how could you? All that fell on Jesus on the cross. So we can come confidently and come fast and come as you are and taste for yourself that God is good, right? Because I can say it a lot, but unless you experience it for yourself, you're not truly going to understand it. But can I encourage you to grieve? I guess is the point of the talk. Grief is not a bad feeling to be avoided. It's the path to healing that you cannot avoid. Because certain things, unless you grieve, you can't move on. For the reasons I said before, right? About justice and fairness. But the good news is that God is actually there with you every step of the way. But sometimes, I guess we can be in so much pain we don't realize it, or we don't feel like God's with us, but he is. So hopefully I've convinced you that grief is not entirely bad and that we should do it. But how should we grieve? I'm honestly not too sure, because it's quite new to me as well, and I'm still learning. So I'm really keen to hear your thoughts in our discussion later. But I have learned a couple of things that may be helpful. And the first one is, don't gaslight yourself by telling yourself you can't grieve. Don't tell yourself the lies we went through. And don't let others do it either. And number 2, feel your grief, own it and accept it, but don't let it own you. And what I mean by that is your grief is very genuine. It deserves respect. It deserves to be felt. But letting it own you instead of owning your grief is where you sink so deep into your grief, you lose self-control, and you can't. It destroys you and weighs you down. Right? Then that's actually not helpful. And I think a key to getting out of that is just sitting with your feelings, which is something that Helen gave a really helpful talk about before, and it's probably also on our Spirit Life channel. So please go listen to it. It's very helpful. Recently, I've been learning to do that. And I think I have a lot of things to grieve too. And it used to really destroy me as well. And I would sink really deep into my grief to the point where I'm wallowing in it and I can't get out. But now it's I find myself able to process the grief faster and better because I'm actually sitting with the emotion instead of letting it like beat me around. I'm processing it, but it's kind of like having an annoying kid in the room with you screaming, but you're not actively fighting the kid. You just let it kind of do its thing, and it's annoying and it doesn't feel good. But afterwards, it feels like you've released some of the grief, some of the pressure, because you've actually dealt with it instead of letting it control you. You know, letting it be too strong and have the power over you that it shouldn't. But yeah, that's a really helpful talk, the sitting with your feelings one. And number 3, be patient with yourself. You'll stop grieving when you no longer need to, right? Only you know when you're ready. There's no timeline. Again, it's not a comparison. Don't be like, this happened to that person. They look fine after a month, and now I'm still grieving after like 2 months. What's wrong with me? It's not a comparison. Everybody's experience and grief is different. Everybody's pain's different. So it's just like a personal thing, right? Yeah. Any questions?
As you were preparing this talk, did you think the moment when you actually grieved and an example where actually you did it and it was good for you?
There's quite a few, actually. Sure. Let me pick one. There's quite a few in my head.
Yeah, just share the one that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. I think like a very strong one for me is like my whole life I felt really unwanted. And then that's affected my life quite a lot in terms of like before I go to school, when I was like even really young, I would already feel like no one wants me there. And so when I walk in, I don't talk to anyone, right? Same thing with church, same thing with any sort of social thingy in the past anyway. And that through counseling, through a lot of processing, I think I realized links to the fact that I never had a relationship with my dad. Right? So I felt rejected by my own family from very young. And I actually struggle to grieve as well. And sometimes I feel like there's a lot of pain inside from things that happen, but I just can't. I feel very numb, and it's hard. But that one specific example, I did manage to give to God. And I kind of like, one day on my bed, I was listening to a song. It wasn't even a Christian song. It's just a random Korean song called Lily of the Valley. But like the lyrics of it is like really romantic. And it kind of makes me feel like I'm like an insignificant, very small white flower in the middle of a valley that's full of flowers, right? Some of them are really big, some of them are really tall. They're all really beautiful. This insignificant one hidden behind the leaves on the edge of the valley. And then God kind of like walks through the valley. He brushes aside all the beautiful big flowers, or he doesn't pick them. He looks for ages until he finds me by brushing aside every other flower, and he picks me up in his hand and cuffs me in his hand. And it just made me feel so wanted, right? And then I started crying. And I felt really sad for what I missed out on in terms of like a child should feel wanted, should feel safe. And I never got that. And I just started bawling. I felt really good though after.
Come on.
Yeah. And I think I grieved that bit. It required help from God because again, like I said, I'm not too sure how to grieve, right? More to learn, but that's one example.
So in that one, do you think there was closure?
Yes. Yeah. And I think what gave me closure is not necessarily like, oh, I have God. I don't need that. It's God can give me what I lacked. Right? There's a big difference. Because if we just like, oh, God can't, I have God, I don't need those things. Well, God created you for the need of those things, right? So it's not that he waves his magic wand and everything's fixed. So he literally gives you what you need. And it's like a niggly small distinction, but it's quite important. It's quite an important one, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry.
Cool.
Just have a thought to add. Grieving also involves loss of a loved one, loss of someone close to you. But grieving you can also be sad at changes in your life. So when I left home at 18, that was a really big change because I was really familiar with home and everything, and I wasn't happy there all the time, but I was looking forward to my leaving home in Napier and going to Auckland. I remember that day was really sad, leaving home. Sandby's my mum. So you can grieve changes in your life as well. Maybe you change your job, maybe you move cities, maybe you go from being a high school student to a uni student. Those changes, they can feel sad. So, yeah, allow yourself to grieve those as well. Loss also, what's the advert? Loss also involves losing something and really meaningful to you as well, whatever it was. An experience, anything.
Good.
Stewie?
Yep, I put some questions in the group.